right, so that was the rapturous welcome that the Indian Prime Minister was accorded by members of the Indian diaspora as soon as he landed in the United States for his three-day visit. From the Philadelphia International Airport, he has just reached the DuPont Hotel in Delaware. Now, on his way, the Indian Prime Minister also met and greeted with the waiting members of the Indian diaspora who had come to get a glimpse of the Indian leader. Many of them, of course, had been waiting for many months to get this opportunity to meet and greet and interact with the Indian Prime Minister. So the Indian Prime Minister was seen waving and even writing a few notes for some of the people who had brought in some of their drawings and other pieces of poetry that they had written for the Indian Prime Minister. Now, the Indian Prime Minister has a special diaspora event that is planned in New York. Remember, Delaware also happens to be the American President Joe Biden's hometown, and this is where both leaders will sit down for a bilateral meeting at 10 p.m. Indian Standard Time. It's roughly about 1 p.m. local time in Delaware. Both leaders are expected to discuss regional issues and topics of mutual interest. Right after which, the Quad Summit will commence. At the summit, India, Australia, Japan and the United States will come together with an aim of supporting an open, free and an inclusive Indo-Pacific. The leaders are expected to review the progress achieved by the Quad over the past year and then set the agenda for the year ahead. Remember, India will be hosting the Quad Leaders Summit next year. The summit is going to be followed by an intimate dinner hosted by President Biden. And also on the agenda is the United Nations Climate Action Summit. The Indian Prime Minister will be addressing the Summit of the Future, the UNGA. The theme of the summit is multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called this a once-in-a-generation United Nations summit. On the sidelines of the summit, the Indian Prime Minister will hold bilateral meetings with several other world leaders and will discuss issues of mutual interest. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is going to happen today as part of this visit by the Indian Prime Minister, we're joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is joining us live from Delaware, where all the action is happening at the moment. Susan, this of course is a big moment. The Indian Prime Minister is there to attend the Quad Summit, but he also will have a bilateral with the American President Joe Biden. Give us a sense of what, of course, is on the agenda when the two leaders meet.
Right. On the agenda are a number of issues that has already they've taken off between India and the United States. Of course, defense cooperation is very important. America and India's aspirations in space are aligned with one another. And of course, the issue of the Ukraine-Russia war. Prime Minister Modi was in both countries recently, and he'll definitely have a message for President Biden. And President Biden definitely wants to hear Prime Minister Modi's views on that, considering the fact that he's one of the few world leaders that has a good relationship with both countries, actually. This is a meeting that's going to take place one-on-one, bilateral, at President Biden's not only hometown, but also his personal home as well. And he's had these bilaterals yesterday with the Australian Prime Minister, today with Prime Minister Modi, and also the leader of Japan is expected to be next as well. But I think it's interesting that, being in Delaware, Prime Minister Modi during his tenure himself has really made it a hallmark of his governance to hold key summits in different parts of India, G20, for example. So more than anyone else, I think he'll appreciate and understand this sentiment on the part of Joe Biden to invite him to his home, but also to Delaware, where, a city that has shaped President Biden, his career and his personality for many years. Of course, the Quad Summit is going to take place at the Catholic school that President Biden attended. And he's sort of going in the footsteps of previous presidents, if you may, as well. It's not uncommon for presidents here in the United States to invite certain leaders that they are very fond of to their homes. It's a personal gesture. Ronald Reagan did it with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in his ranch in California. George W. Bush invited Vladimir Putin of Russia twice to his personal home, once in Texas, once in May. And also, of course, President Donald Trump had many meetings at Mar-a-Lago. You may remember with the late Shinzo Abe of Japan, they were playing golf. They were having dinner afterwards when unexpectedly North Korea launched a missile attack, and all of a sudden it became this strategic diplomatic meeting between the two leaders. So, while it's a very friendly environment, there is going to be a lot of serious talk, but also, both sides and both leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, of course, will have their eyes and ears open regarding the many challenges that are facing the global community right now.
Right. Now, the Quad is not an alliance, a military alliance. It is a grouping of nations that, of course, came into existence to counter the belligerence of China. China, of course, calls the Quad as a sort of a NATO-like alliance that has been put together by the United States and other nations to counter the Chinese. So when the four leaders, of course, meet for the Quad summit, how prominently are they likely to be discussing China, considering that there are two active wars that are raging at the moment?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. China is on top of the agenda. A safe, free and open Indo-Pacific is on top of the agenda of a Quad leaders meeting. Maritime security cooperation, of course, between the four countries is very important in countering China. How do they do that? With joint Coast Guard operations, critical and emerging technologies, infrastructure development, as well as humanitarian and natural disaster response. Remember, the Quad was formed back in 2004 in response to a tsunami in Japan. It was reinvigorated in 2017 by President Trump, and President Biden put the stamp of leadership, elevated it to the leadership level during his tenure. They want to enhance regional security by promoting economic cooperation. And Delaware is very interesting, I will tell you, is a state that is a corporate hub, notably for tech. More than 50% of America's Fortune 500 companies are based here in Delaware, including Apple and Google. And the reason for that is, first of all, there's no sales tax in the state, one of the few states. And second of all, it has very friendly corporate laws. So that is also a side note of significance regarding this state that President Biden chose, just because there's so much economic cooperation going on between these four countries, notably India and the United States.
Very interesting there. Thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us and getting us all those details. We'll, of course, come back to you as this story develops through the day. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.